We are now in episode 7 of the Ottoman Portuguese War by Kings and Generals. This one is called Rustem Pasha's Failures. So, I'm wondering if things are about to shift from the Ottoman favor to the Portuguese favor.
The greatest threat to the now dominant Ottoman Empire in the coming years would not come from further Portuguese offensives, but from factionalism. Despite his successes in the Indian Ocean, Hadim Suleiman Pasha was removed from his position as Grand Vizier in 1544 after accusations of embezzlement and died later the same year. In his place rose Rustem Pasha, the Sultan's son-in-law, and a major rival of both Hadim Suleiman and his protege Daud Pasha, who had taken over as governor of Egypt. Rustem's paranoia and distrust of Daud, who had once spread a false rumour that Rustem suffered from syphilis while the two men had been competing for the hand of the Sultan's daughter, would lead to several heavy-handed attempts to weaken his rivals in the Indian Ocean provinces, with often disastrous results. The first example of Rustem—
Oh no. Yeah, I feel like they were about to get a lot of disasters from Rustem. He seems, already from that little excerpt, he seems gung-ho in all the wrong ways, probably, I'm gonna get. And yeah, I feel like little did we know in the Ottoman Portuguese War that the real great threat to the Ottomans at this point is gonna be themselves now.
distaste for Indian Ocean matters would be in 1546, when Qajar Safar and Sultan Mahmud of Gujarat launched a second attack on Diu. This assault had been years in the preparation and had every possibility of success, but despite this, Rustem refused to send any direct Ottoman support for the siege. The governor of Zebid, being a relative of Qajar Safar's, did send a small detachment of janissaries and artillery to support the Gujarati effort, but compared to the huge expedition Hadim Suleiman had taken to Diu in 1538, it was clear little support would be coming from Rustem Pasha or the Ottoman central government. The Gujarati force was powerful in its own right though, and the second defense of Diu stretched the Portuguese almost to the breaking point, as all available ships and soldiers were brought to reinforce the vital fortress. The officer in charge of the Gujarati centre, a Turk by the name of Safi Aga, who had previously overseen the construction of Surat's walls, built a set of stone ramparts facing the fortress walls, from which the Gujarati and Ottoman cannons began firing in June 1546. The accurate return fire from the defenders would neutralize much of the artillery, however, and Safi Aga was himself killed by falling debris as Portuguese cannons battered the ramparts. In August, another officer, Jahangir Khan, would deal severe damage to the fort through the use of sappers and cause great casualties to the Portuguese defenders within. But the overall commander of the Gujarati army, Burhan ul Mulk, failed to capitalize on the breach in the fort's walls, later being accused of cowardice by Arab chronicler Zafar ul Wali. An attempted night attack on the damaged fortifications by another Turk, Jujar Khan, was discovered and repulsed by the Portuguese, with Jujar being struck in the temple by a bullet and falling from the walls to his death. By the time the Portuguese viceroy arrived with further reinforcements to break the siege in November, both sides had taken severe casualties in the long months of bombardment and assaults, yet the fort still held firm. Qajar Safar had been among the fallen, and his community of Ottoman merchants and expatriates had borne the brunt of the fighting, suffering the most severe casualties and largest expenses, largely ending their existence as a major political power within Gujarat.
Dang.
Much like in the first siege of Diu, the defeat of the Ottomans' allies at Diu was partially offset by opportunistic gains elsewhere. While the
probably Rustem's not wanting to, not get involved and whatnot, didn't help the situation. And Man, so much has happened around Dew in this conflict, huh? Man.
The full strength of Portuguese India was devoted to defending Dew's walls. Ottoman governors and allies in Arabia sacked Muscat, captured the Portuguese allied port of Kishin, and ousted a rebellious tribal governor in Basra to bring the crucial province under direct Ottoman control. But Rustem Pasha's abandonment of Hadim Suleiman's network of alliances had cost the Ottomans a unique opportunity to oust the Portuguese from India, and his policies would create further disasters in the coming years.
Dang.
The first
Yeah, okay, off the bat, yeah, Rustem's almost like choosing to sort of not fully, commit himself to the affairs of what's going on in the Indian Ocean seems to already be disastrous. And again, that opportunity of what happened here at Dew, who knows, I think they could have if he had fully, you know, gone all in. Maybe they could have finally secured it, but as things stand, the Portuguese now, their greatest asset is just Rustem, helping them help turn the tide of the war, so they ought to be thanking Rustem, you know?
First of these would be the appointment of Uvey's Pasha as governor of Ottoman Yemen in 1547. Uvey's was a young and inexperienced officer, chosen for his personal loyalty to Rustem rather than talent.
No.
Within a year of his taking office, the whole of Yemen had risen up in revolt against the Ottomans, with local leaders inviting the Portuguese in to aid their rebellion, and Uvey's Pasha being assassinated. This one rebellion came very close to undoing the Ottomans' gains of the previous decades, and only quick action on the part of Daud Pasha, circumventing the chain of command and bypassing Rustem, allowed the rebellion to be crushed before the Portuguese could intervene.
Okay, yeah, Daud, good move on his part, because if he had tried to go with Rustem and all that, they may have just lost this area, so that's great on his part. That was a great move.
After this debacle, Rustem made no further interventions in the Indian Ocean for several years, allowing relative peace to exist between the Ottomans and Portuguese from 1547 until 1552. But in 1552, Rustem would be back to meddling in full force, launching a massive but poorly conceived offensive against the Portuguese island stronghold of Hormuz. Before the expedition had even been launched, several problems were obvious. For one, the 5 years of peace had been very profitable for the Ottomans, as numerous Portuguese merchants had begun to trade illicitly with the Ottomans in Basra, rather than make the far longer journey around Africa. Despite the official ban on this trade, even the captain of Portuguese Hormuz seems to have had commercial contracts in Basra, demonstrating that relations were warming up between local Ottoman and Portuguese representatives even as the two empires remained hostile. A direct attack on Hormuz would shatter a status quo that had been very much in the Ottomans' favour. Another problem was the command structure of the great fleet Rustem Pasha was assembling in Basra. Most of the captains and admirals in charge were Rustem's loyalists from the Mediterranean Navy, with little or no experience in the Indian Ocean. In overall command was Piri Reis, a legendary admiral and explorer in his own right, but now nearly 90 years old and reluctant to return to service. The last problem was a heavily armed Portuguese warship that had arrived in Hormuz purely by chance just ahead of the Ottoman fleet in April 1552. Having lost a large portion of their munitions in a shipwreck prior to making landfall, the Ottoman force pillaged the surrounding city, but found themselves unable to crack the fort's defences, bolstered as they were by the warship's crew and guns. At this failure, Piri Reis quickly lost his nerve and brought the fleet back to Basra, then abandoned his command to flee back to Suez with his plunder. Upon his return, the storied admiral would be executed for abandoning his post, while the fleet lay leaderless and trapped by a Portuguese blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
What a disaster. Just one guy is bringing a lot of, like, issues, because before this, the Ottomans, despite whatever setbacks they had, were doing well overall, and even kind of winning through to their diplomatic ties and PR. But since Rustem has become a major player, notice the shift of just everything. One person is helping, like, not do well for the Ottomans. Yeah, he doesn't strike me as competent. I'm like tempted to just say his incompetence is probably the biggest decisive, like, setback for the Ottomans so far in this series.
Attempt to break this blockade by Murad Beg came close to succeeding, before being foiled by changing winds. A second attempt by Seydi Ali Rais, another Mediterranean admiral without any Indian Ocean experience, saw the Ottoman fleet ambushed near Muscat and destroyed almost entirely.
Oh my goodness.
The defeated Seydi Ali Rais managed to escape, eventually taking refuge with the Ottoman merchants of Gujarat after being cut off from returning to Suez, but few others were so lucky. This string of naval defeats was a far greater disaster than any the Ottomans had yet faced in the Indian Ocean, and a major humiliation for Rustem Pasha, who was removed from his position as Grand Vizier later the same year.
That's a great move. Getting rid of him, best thing you can do. Yeah, thanks to his incompetence, the Ottomans suffered a lot of losses that they could have easily avoided. Man, now things are back on the Portuguese side, and the Portuguese didn't really have to do much except let the Ottomans kind of, like, have their own issue. Like, Rustem might have been the MVP for the Portuguese side. Oh. Alright, guys. Tomorrow we're gonna wrap this up with the conclusion of this series. I'm looking forward to it.